Perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Davis, and I'm the registered dietitian for the YMCA of Greater Richmond. And tonight, we're just going to have a little conversation and be talking about fueling your body for a successful 10K. So we're gonna cover everything about how nutrition supports your overall performance and your recovery. Before we kind of jump in, since it's only a few of us, you guys can just come on off mute. And I just want to kind of get a little grasp of what are some things that maybe you've heard about training for a 10K nutrition wise, or what are some things you all have been implementing with your training nutrition wise. You guys can just hop off mute since it's just a few of us. Anybody?
I would think carbs, like make sure to eat some carbs and protein to
Great.
have energy. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, awesome.
I would say drink plenty of water, but everyone knows that, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay. So we've got carbs, protein, water. Anybody else? Okay, awesome. So we'll go ahead and get started. I was just saying I'm not the most tech savvy millennial, so bear with me here while I switch our slides. Okay. So we'll start out with just basic nutrition and endurance. So we already know, like we just talked about, what we eat is going to significantly impact your performance, right? So we know that the food that we eat is going to serve as fuel, and that's going to power the body. So the right nutrition can definitely help you, again, improve your endurance. It can prevent fatigue. And also, we really want to make sure that we are reducing GI issues while you're on your run. And we also want to make sure that we're supporting a healthy recovery. So today we'll talk about carbs, proteins, fat, hydration, like you mentioned. We'll talk about race week strategy, what to eat before and after the run. But first, we're going to start our discussion with micronutrients. So again, just feel free to hop off of mute. Does anybody know what the macronutrients are? Anybody want to take any guesses about what they are? I just gave you a little clue.
Is it fats, carbs, and protein?
Ding, ding, ding. That's correct. Yeah, fats, carbs, and protein. So that's what we're going to be focused on. Give me 1 second. Sorry, again, not the most tech savvy millennial here. Got to get to this. Okay. All right. And then I'm going to go over here. Okay, yeah, so the macronutrients, just like you said, that's going to be the carbs, the protein, and the fat. So again, those are really what's going to impact your performance for this run. So we'll start off with carbs. So I think one of you, I think it was Gina, mentioned carbs, right? So that is going to be the primary source of fuel for the run. So when you eat carbs, your body stores it as glycogen in your muscles and in your liver. So during the 10K, your body's going to rely pretty heavily on these glycogen stores. So if you don't have enough stored, you can kind of feel a little bit sluggish or heavy. You may just like hit a wall earlier than you've expected. Has anybody kind of had any of that while you've been training, just feeling a little tired or feel like you've hit any walls? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So that can happen. That probably means that you're not getting enough, again, enough of that glycogen. So we'll definitely talk a little bit more in depth about what kind of carbs you can have and how much. So yeah, so you want to perform, again, you want to rely on the carbs because you will perform a little bit better when you're eating the adequate amount of carbs, and you want to do it consistently. So especially if you're training really heavily during the week, you want to make sure that you're eating enough carbs throughout the week, not just the day of the training or the day of the run that you're preparing for. So the ACSM recommends that carbohydrates should be scaled to like your training load, right? So again, if you're training 5 days a week, you want to make sure that you're having a little bit more carbs. If you're only training once or twice a week, you probably don't need as many, right? But as a general range, you want to aim for about 6 to 10 grams per kilogram a day of your body weight a day. And that's just, again, depending on how much and how hard you're training. Does anybody have any questions so far? All right, so now we're going to get into the different kinds of carbs. So there's two different kinds of carbs. There's the simple carbs and there's the complex carbs. Has anybody, you can just, raise your hand or give a thumbs up. Has anybody ever heard of like the simple and the complex carbs? Yeah, Gina, thank you. Awesome. Okay, great. Yeah. So carbohydrates, again, they can be broken down into the two categories. So we have the complex carbs and we have the simple carbs, and both of them play a role when we're talking about this 10K. So the complex carbs, they digest a little bit more slowly. They're really great for everyday fueling. So again, things like oatmeal, brown rice, quinoa, whole grain products, whole grain bread, sweet potatoes. Those are going to be a good source of like the complex carbs. So you really want to make sure that you are also paying attention to the timing of when you're eating the complex versus when you're eating the simple carbs. So you want to have those faster carbs, those simple carbs, closer to when you're actually exercising or when you're running. And then again, you want to have those complex carbs throughout the day to sustain you, right? Because those take longer to digest. So this can be helpful, before, during your long training sessions or a long run, because they are going to provide you with the fast energy, those complex carbs or those simple carbs, excuse me. So your carb needs are going to change, again, what we just talked about, based on how much you're training. So you want to increase the carbs on longer or harder days, and keep them steady throughout the week. And again, you want to avoid like drastically changing anything or cutting them really, really quickly close to race day. You want to keep it pretty consistent. Okay. So most 10K runners aren't going to need to like do extreme carb loading. Has anybody ever heard of carb running or carb loading before? Just give a thumbs up, thumbs down. Yeah, yeah. So usually, again, that's something that I think a lot of times we can kind of overdo it. So when it comes to the 10K, you probably won't need to do extreme carb loading. You want to focus on carbs because, again, that's the primary fuel source. But unless you're running a marathon, you won't need to do anything too extreme. So the day before the race, just focus on a carb-forward meal, and you want it to be something that's familiar and easy to digest. So definitely not trying any new foods the night before or the day of the race. Don't experiment with new foods. Like I said, if you expect to be out there over like 90 minutes, carbs are a little bit more important. But again, with the 10K, I would think by around that 90-minute mark, most of you all will be finishing up. So for many runners, just steady eating throughout the week, that's gonna be most effective for you. Okay, so protein. So we know that this is not the primary fuel source, but we know that it's essential, right? So does anybody I guess it's on the screen, but does anybody know why protein is important? Just hop off of mute. Okay. All right. Well, protein is important because it's essential for your muscles to repair, and it's also really important for recovery. So after the run. So again, we don't want to leave protein out. So most active individuals benefit from about 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So again, you want to spread that out throughout the day, just like the carbs, right? We're spreading it out. You don't want to just load it all into one meal. So after harder runs or after your 10K, pairing your protein with a carb, that's going to help rebuild the muscles and replenish those glycogen stores. And you can get protein from plenty of food sources. So, poultry, eggs, fish, Greek yogurt, tofu, legumes, so things like beans, quinoa, nuts, and seeds are also a great source of protein. Does anybody else know of any other protein sources that weren't listed that they include in their diet? I know everybody eats a little bit differently. Okay, great. All right, so next we're on to the fats. So fats are just important for our overall health, right? So they also aid in hormone production. they also help keep us full, right? It helps keep us satiated, and that helps us with sustained energy. So fats are going to provide a slow and steady release of energy. So very high fat meals right before running, we definitely want to avoid that because that can slow digestion and cause a little bit of GI discomfort. So you want to keep like heavy, really greasy meals away from the morning of the race or the morning of the run. But you can focus on those healthier fats, right? So the nuts, the seeds, avocados, really great, olive oil, any kind of fatty fish like salmon, just not immediately before the run. But again, we kind of talked about spreading it out throughout the week, right? Getting the fuel that you need for your body. So there's no specific recommendation for the fat for the training. It really is based on an individual's needs. Okay, so I remember we talked about hydration. Someone mentioned hydration. So we definitely want to make sure that we're hydrating before the race. So it doesn't just start the morning of, right? But a general guideline is to get about 16 to 20 ounces a few hours before exercise or before the run, a smaller amount closer to the time of the run if needed, about 8 to 10 ounces, 10 to 20 minutes before. So again, we don't have to overhydrate, especially during the race, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. Okay. So for most 10Ks, especially if you're finishing, like we talked about, in under an hour or around that hour mark, you may not need much fluid during the race unless it's really hot. So again, a general range is about 15 to 25 ounces per hour, depending on how much you're sweating and again, the weather. So if it's really hot, obviously you'll want to drink more. You don't need to force yourself to drink the fluids. Just sip to thirst, meaning if you're thirsty, drink. If you don't feel thirsty, you don't have to make yourself drink because again, over drinking isn't necessary. So after the 10K, go ahead and just rehydrate based on how much you sweat. You can use the strategy of drinking about 16 to 24 ounces for every pound lost. Some people will replace their electrolytes, but electrolytes are most important if you're sweating heavily or racing in the heat. Again, more like those marathon runs, right? So you can just refuel with some snacks or some foods that contain a little bit of water and some sodium. So that could look like some deli meat, like rolled up with a little piece of fruit, like an apple or some grapes. That could be a deli meat sandwich with a piece of fruit. That could be chocolate milk with a banana. So we're going to get into what some of the other snacks and meals look like pre and post race in just a minute.
Hey Stephanie, we have a question about this slide. Someone asked,
Yeah.
what's the balance of water and electrolyte type drinks?
Yeah, so I would say a good one is those liquid IVs are pretty good, but I would say again, you don't need that whole packet. So as we just discussed, here I can even go back for you. So we really don't need to rehydrate a lot with electrolytes. Again, that's if you're sweating profusely, if you're in the heat. You really don't need a lot to replace the electrolytes. Again, you can replace it with some fruit and, some deli meat because that has a little bit of sodium in it. So you can replace it through foods rather than having those drinks because it's, again, you're probably for the 10K, I would say under that like 90-minute mark, right? So if you're out there for an hour, close to that hour mark, you should be fine without having to replace it with like an actual drink. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it did.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so fueling before the 10K. So the pre-race meal that you can choose should be mostly carbohydrates like we talked about, moderate in protein, and low in fat and fiber, right, to prevent those GI issues. So you can aim for, again, about 1 to 4 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight within like the 1 to 4 hours before the run. So depending on what your stomach kind of feels like, right? So if you're hungry, eat. If you're not that hungry and you want a little snack, have something smaller. So you want to stick with foods, again, that you are used to, that you've eaten before during your training. Race day is definitely not the time to try something new, just because, again, we want to try to not have any GI issues while we're in the 10K. So some examples can include some whole grain toast with some almond butter and banana slices. You could do a cup of oatmeal with berries or a banana and some milk, Greek yogurt with berries and granola, a whole grain bagel with some low-fat cream cheese or like some mashed avocado. You could do a banana and a handful of nuts or some trail mix. You could also do rice cakes with almond butter and honey. Okay. So now we're going to talk about post-nutrition. So for post-nutrition, again, we want to focus on those macronutrients that we talked about at the very beginning, right? So we want to replace what our bodies lost and used during the race. So we want to aim for a post meal between like 1 to 2 hours after the run. And then you want to eat a combination of, again, the carbohydrates to replace the glycogen, and about 20 to 30 grams of protein to support that muscle repair. So some examples could be some chicken stir fry with veggies and brown rice. If you wanted to have like some side salad or some fruit with that, you could do that as well. You could do a quinoa and black bean bowl with some avocado and veggies of your choice. You could do salmon with sweet potatoes and some Brussels sprouts. If your appetite's low and you're not very hungry, like a little fruit smoothie with a good quality protein powder works great. And then again, rehydrate as needed. And remember, we only need electrolytes to be replaced if you are sweating profusely. All right, so again, the main takeaways for this evening are just to keep it simple. So again, we want to prioritize the carbohydrates because they're our main source of energy. Make sure that you're getting enough protein to support your recovery and strength. You want to, before the race day, you want to eat a carb-focused meal that you've had before. You don't want to try any new foods day of the race or any new supplements the day of the run. Stay hydrated in the days leading up to the race and drink based on conditions in your sweat rate. So more isn't always better when it comes to water. So just listen to your body. And then after you finish, again, refuel with the carbohydrates and protein and replace those fluids that were lost so that your body can recover properly. Okay, so now I'll kind of open up the floor. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions that they do have.
We did have a question in the chat from Kim. Are beans considered carbs and a protein source?
That's a great question. They're a little bit of both. So that was a great question. So yes, a bean is a good source of protein, but it also contains carbohydrates. So again, that would be a great pre-race or post-race because again, it's going to have, especially if you pair it with rice, it's going to have a good source of carbs and some protein. Anyone else have any questions for me? It's a quiet crew tonight.
But you guys can come off mute and ask any questions, or you can put them in the chat.
I'll give everybody another minute. Maybe someone's typing. So again, yeah,
we do have a question in the chat. Are there any foods that have high calories to eat hours before workout?
Yeah, so a high calorie food could be anything with like nuts or nut butter, right? That's a really calorie dense food. Those healthy fats like we talked about. So again, nut butter, you can do a fatty fish like salmon, that's going to be pretty calorie dense. Avocados have a really good amount of calories. Any kind of nut or a trail mix, those are going to also be good fuel sources before a workout too.
Another question is peanut butter okay in place of almond butter?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Great questions, guys.
All right, another question. We don't want to eat too much fiber before a run, but is there any guideline on how much would keep us fueled but not be too much on the stomach?
Yeah. So again, I would say instead of focusing on fiber, we would focus again on those carb forward meals like we talked about. So those carb forward meals did have fiber, right? But we weren't loading it up. That wasn't the main focus. The main focus was the carbohydrates. So I think as long as you stick with, again, keeping it simple, a lot of us don't get enough fiber in our diet. So I feel like you'd have to try really hard to have too much before the race, if that answers your question. If not, I'm happy to clarify more.
Katie, did that answer your question? It did. Okay. And
Perfect.
then someone wanted to know if you could provide recipes to make recommended meals or snacks.
Ooh, yes. That sounds great. I would love to do that. Yes, I will kind of take what we talked about in the slideshow and I can expand on that and I can send that out to you all. When is the race?
It's August 18th or August,
Oh,
April
perfect.
18th.
Okay.
April
Yeah,
18th, sorry.
absolutely. Okay, yeah, I can definitely send that out.
And then we did have a question about your slides. If you can email them to me, I'll post it with the recording.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Any other
Great.
questions? Did someone
Couldn't
come
tell.
off mute?
Yeah, I couldn't tell if that was on accident or on purpose. Yeah, so again, it really is keeping it simple. Um, the 10K is such a great accomplishment, right? Like that is I'm sure you all have been training and working really hard. Just remember, it's not necessarily a marathon. So some of the things that we've heard about training is more geared towards marathon running, right? Like the carb loading, the electrolytes, loading up on, overhydrating. All of that is more for those long distance when you're really, really going for a long time. So just again, you'll have the slides. I'm happy to send recipes, but just keeping it simple, carb forward. Make sure that you're focusing on protein and carbs before and after, and then hydrate as needed.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, are there any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop recording then.